The rain taps against my kitchen window the same way it did 23 years ago when I first met Samuel Miller. I'm standing here now, 35 years old, watching the droplets race down the glass, and I can't shake the feeling that everything has come full circle. The apartment is quiet except for the storm outside and the soft hum of the refrigerator, but my mind is anything but peaceful. There's a letter on my counter, cream-colored paper with familiar handwriting, and I've been avoiding it for 3 days now. Some truths are easier to ignore than face, even when they arrive wrapped in kindness. I was 12 when Samuel first shared his lunch with me. 12 and awkward, all elbows and knees and thick-rimmed glasses that I constantly pushed up my nose. The cafeteria at Riverside Middle School was a battlefield of social hierarchies that I navigated poorly, usually ending up at the corner table by the windows, eating alone while pretending to read. That particular Tuesday in October, I'd forgotten my lunch money again. My mother had been working double shifts at the hospital, and in the chaos of morning routines, these things slipped through the cracks of our carefully managed life. I remember the hollow feeling in my stomach, not just from hunger, but from the familiar shame of being different, of not quite fitting anywhere. The other kids moved in clusters, their laughter echoing off the linoleum floors, while I sat with my book propped open, trying to make myself invisible. That's when Samuel appeared at my table, his tray loaded with 2 sandwiches, an apple, and a carton of chocolate milk. If you're listening to this from somewhere around the world, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment with your location, and if this story resonates with you, hit that hype button to help others find it too. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones we almost don't tell. Samuel didn't ask permission or make a big production of it. He simply placed half his peanut butter and jelly sandwich on a napkin and slid it across the table. "You look hungry," he said, as if sharing lunch with the weird kid was the most natural thing in the world. His voice was gentle even then, with a slight rasp that would deepen as we grew older but never lose its warmth. I looked up from my book, probably some fantasy novel about dragons or distant kingdoms, and met his eyes for the first time. They were brown, the color of autumn leaves, and they held no pity or condescension, just simple human kindness. "Thank you," I managed to whisper, my cheeks burning with embarrassment and something else I couldn't name. He smiled, a crooked grin that revealed slightly overlapping front teeth, and unwrapped his own half of the sandwich. We ate in comfortable silence, the rain pattering against the cafeteria windows, creating a cocoon of intimacy in that crowded room. I didn't know then that this moment would replay in my memory thousands of times. Over the next 2 decades, each recollection adding new layers of meaning I was too young to understand. That was the beginning of our friendship, though friendship feels like an inadequate word for what we shared. Samuel became my constant companion through the remainder of middle school and into high school. We were inseparable in the way that only adolescent boys can be, spending countless hours in each other's bedrooms, playing video games, working on homework, or simply talking about everything and nothing. His family welcomed me with open arms, treating me like another son, while my mother, when she wasn't working, seemed relieved that I'd found someone who understood my quiet nature. Samuel was everything I wasn't. Where I was anxious and overthinking, he was calm and steady. Where I stumbled over words, he spoke with quiet confidence. Where I hid behind books and solitude, he moved through the world with an easy grace that I envied and admired in equal measure. Yet somehow, impossibly, he chose to spend his time with me. We complemented each other in ways that felt effortless and natural. Two puzzle pieces that fit together perfectly despite our different shapes. The years blurred together in a haze of shared experiences. We built forts in his backyard, stayed up all night playing video games, studied together for exams, and navigated the treacherous waters of teenage social life side by side. Samuel was popular enough to move in different circles, athletic and charming in ways that drew people to him, but he always came back to me. Our friendship was the constant in both our lives, the safe harbor we returned to when the world became too complicated or demanding. I think I began to understand the true nature of my feelings for Samuel during our sophomore year of high school. It wasn't a sudden revelation, but a gradual awakening, like watching the sunrise slowly illuminate a landscape that had always been there, but hidden in darkness. The signs were subtle at first. The way my pulse quickened when he laughed at something I'd said. The jealousy that twisted in my stomach when he talked about girls he found attractive. The dreams that left me confused and ashamed, filled with images and sensations I couldn't reconcile with everything I'd been taught about normal, acceptable desire. We were 15 when I first allowed myself to acknowledge, in the privacy of my own mind, that what I felt for Samuel went far beyond friendship. The realization terrified me. This was small-town Ohio in the early 2000s, where being different in that particular way was still something whispered about in hallways and used as ammunition for cruelty. I'd watched other boys get tormented for perceived weakness or femininity, seen how quickly acceptance could turn to rejection when someone stepped outside the narrow boundaries of what was considered normal. So I buried those feelings deep, locked them away in a corner of my heart where they couldn't hurt anyone, especially Samuel. Our friendship was too precious to risk, too important to complicate with my own confused desires. I convinced myself that what I felt was just intense admiration, the natural result of spending so much time with someone I respected and cared about. I threw myself into maintaining the status quo, becoming an expert at hiding in plain sight. The summer before our senior year, Samuel got his first serious girlfriend, and her name was Andrea White, a pretty brunette with a bright smile and an easy laugh who played volleyball and sang in the school choir. She was kind to me, never making me feel like a third wheel when the three of us hung out. But her presence changed everything. Suddenly there were places I couldn't go, conversations I wasn't part of, moments when Samuel's attention was focused entirely on someone else. I told myself I was happy for him. I practiced the words in the mirror, perfecting the tone of friendly support that I would use when he talked about her. I became an expert at deflecting questions about my own romantic interests, always having a ready excuse for why I wasn't dating anyone. Too focused on studies, too shy, too picky. The lies came easily after a while, as natural as breathing, because the alternative was unthinkable. But late at night, alone in my bedroom, I would let myself imagine a different world. One where I could tell Samuel the truth about how I felt, where I could reach for his hand without fear, where the love I carried for him could exist in the light instead of hiding in shadows. These fantasies were both comfort and torture, offering momentary relief before reality crashed back down with crushing weight. Our senior year passed in a blur of college applications, standardized tests, and the bittersweet awareness that our childhood was ending. Samuel had been accepted to Ohio State on a partial academic scholarship, planning to study business with dreams of eventually running his own company. I was headed to a smaller liberal arts college 3 hours away, drawn by their English program and the promise of anonymity in a place where nobody knew my history. The night before graduation, we sat on the roof of his family's garage, sharing a six-pack of beer that his older brother had bought for us. The stars were brilliant above us, unpolluted by the city lights that would later dim them in our adult lives. Samuel was talking about the future, his voice filled with excitement and possibility, while I listened and tried to memorize every detail of the moment. The way the moonlight caught in his hair, the warmth of his shoulder pressed against mine, the sound of his laughter mixing with the chirping of crickets in the distance. "Promise me we'll stay in touch," he said suddenly, turning to look at me with those brown eyes that had haunted my dreams for years. "I know college changes people, and we'll both be busy, but promise me we won't lose this." He gestured between us, encompassing our entire shared history in that simple movement. "I promise," I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. What I couldn't tell him was that losing him felt impossible because he was already so deeply embedded in my heart that removing him would require surgery. What I couldn't explain was that staying in touch would be both salvation and slow torture, a constant reminder of everything I wanted but could never have. College did change us, as it changes everyone. We exchanged letters at first, then emails, then sporadic text messages as our lives diverged and new experiences claimed our attention. Samuel thrived in the social atmosphere of a large university, joining a fraternity and making friends with an ease that I envied from afar. I found my own smaller community among fellow English majors and theater kids, people who understood my love of literature and my tendency toward introspection. I dated a few girls during college, Relationships that felt like elaborate performances where I played the role of normal heterosexual male. They were kind, intelligent women who deserved better than someone going through the motions. And I always found ways to end things before they became too serious. Each relationship taught me more about who I wasn't, even as I continued to struggle with understanding who I actually was. Samuel, meanwhile, had broken up with Andrea during freshman year and cycled through a series of relationships that he described in his increasingly infrequent communications. He seemed happy, fulfilled in ways that I could only imagine. Sometimes I would stalk his social media profiles, studying photos of him at parties or sporting events, searching for clues about the man he was becoming while I remained frozen in amber, still the awkward kid who'd needed someone to share their lunch. We saw each other during holiday breaks, of course, but those meetings became increasingly awkward as we struggled to bridge the growing gap between our lives. The easy intimacy of our teenage friendship had been replaced by polite conversation and careful boundaries. We were both performing versions of ourselves, I realize now. Him, the successful college student with his life figured out, me, the dedicated academic focused on his studies. Neither performance was entirely false, but neither was completely true either. After graduation, the distance between us became even more pronounced. Samuel moved to Columbus to start his career in marketing, while I headed to graduate school in Chicago, pursuing a master's degree in English literature with vague plans of becoming a professor. The letters stopped entirely, replaced by occasional birthday texts and holiday cards. We were living parallel lives that occasionally intersected through social media updates, but no longer truly touched. I threw myself into academic life with the same intensity I'd once reserved for hiding my feelings. Graduate school was a refuge where intellectual pursuits could substitute for emotional honesty, where I could analyze the love stories of dead poets without confronting my own unwritten narrative. I was good at it too. My professors praised my insights into queer subtext in Victorian literature, never suspecting that my analysis came from lived experience rather than purely academic interest. It was during my second year of graduate school that I finally began to confront the truth I'd been avoiding for so long. I was 24, sitting in a seminar on contemporary American poetry, when the professor assigned us to read a collection by a gay poet whose work explored themes of desire, identity, and self-acceptance. As I read those poems alone in my apartment, something inside me cracked open. Here was someone who had found words for feelings I'd never been able to articulate, who had transformed pain and longing into art that spoke directly to my hidden self. That night, I called my mother for the first time in months. We talked about safe topics at first, my classes and her work at the hospital, but eventually I found the courage to tell her about the poetry collection I'd been reading. She listened quietly as I stumbled through an explanation of why the poems had affected me so deeply, my voice shaking with the weight of unspoken truths. "I think I understand," she said finally, her voice gentle and warm. "I've been wondering when you'd feel ready to talk about this." The relief that flooded through me was so intense it left me gasping. She'd known, or at least suspected, and she was still there. Still my mother, still loving me despite everything I'd been afraid to reveal. Coming out to my mother was the first step in a longer journey towards self-acceptance. I began seeing a therapist, joined a support group for LGBTQ graduate students, and slowly started building friendships with people who knew and accepted all of me, not just the carefully curated version I'd been presenting to the world. It was liberating and terrifying in equal measure, like learning to walk all over again after years of crawling. Throughout this process of self-discovery, thoughts of Samuel were never far from my mind. I wondered if he would accept this new version of me, or if the revelation would destroy whatever remained of our friendship. I drafted dozens of emails and letters that I never sent, each attempt falling short of capturing the complexity of what I wanted to say. How do you explain to someone that you've been in love with them for over a decade? How do you apologize for years of dishonesty without destroying the foundation of everything you've shared? I finished my master's degree and moved back to Ohio to teach high school English, partly because I missed home, and partly because some part of me hoped that geographical proximity might make reconnecting with Samuel easier. I rented a small apartment in a suburb of Cleveland, close enough to my hometown that I could visit my mother regularly but far enough away that I wouldn't constantly be confronted by memories of my adolescence. Teaching turned out to be my calling in ways I hadn't expected. Working with teenagers reminded me daily of the importance of authenticity and self-acceptance. I watched my students struggle with many of the same questions that had tormented me, and I tried to create a classroom environment where difference was celebrated rather than hidden. I couldn't give them the guidance I'd needed at their age, but I could offer them something almost as valuable: the example of an adult who had learned to accept himself. 3 years passed in this new life. I was content, if not entirely happy, building a career in a community that felt genuine for the first time in my adult life. I dated occasionally, mostly other teachers or men I met through friends, but nothing serious developed. Part of me was still stuck in the past, measuring every potential relationship against the impossible standard of what I'd felt for Samuel. It wasn't fair to anyone involved, including myself, but some patterns are harder to break than others. Then, on a rainy Tuesday in March, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I hadn't seen in over 2 years. "Hey, it's Samuel. I'm going to be in Cleveland for work next week. Would you like to get dinner and catch up?" The message was casual, friendly, giving no hint of the earthquake it caused in my carefully constructed world. I stared at the screen for a full 5 minutes before responding with what I hoped was an equally casual acceptance. We arranged to meet at a restaurant downtown, neutral territory that held no memories of our shared past. I spent the week leading up to our dinner alternating between excitement and terror, wondering if he would notice the changes in me, if I would be able to hide the feelings that had never really gone away. The night of our dinner, I arrived early and sat at the bar, nursing a beer and trying to calm my nerves. When Samuel walked through the door, my breath caught in my throat. He was 31 now, no longer the boy who had shared his lunch with me, but the man he had grown into was even more beautiful than I remembered. His face had lost the softness of youth, replaced by sharper angles and a confidence that spoke of success and self-assurance. His hair was shorter than he'd worn it in high school, professionally styled, and he moved with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own skin. He spotted me at the bar and smiled, that same crooked grin that had captivated me 20 years earlier. And suddenly I was 12 years old again, grateful and terrified and desperately in love. We hugged, a brief, friendly embrace that sent electricity shooting through my entire body, and I wondered if he could feel the way my heart was racing. Dinner was surprisingly easy once we settled into conversation. We talked about our careers, his success in marketing, and my satisfaction with teaching, catching up on the basic facts of our lives with the careful politeness of old friends who had grown apart. He told me about his apartment in Columbus, his recent promotion, his plans to travel to Europe that summer. I shared stories about my students, my mother's recent retirement, the novel I was attempting to write in my spare time. But underneath the surface pleasantries, I could sense something else, a tension that hadn't been there in our college-era reunions. Samuel seemed more thoughtful than I remembered, more given to long pauses and searching looks. Several times I caught him studying my face as if trying to solve a puzzle, and I wondered what he was seeing there. "You seem different," he said finally as we were finishing our entrees. "More settled somehow, more yourself, if that makes sense." The observation hit closer to home than he could have known. "I guess I've figured some things out," I said carefully, not sure how much truth I was ready to reveal. He nodded slowly, swirling the wine in his glass. "I've been doing some figuring out myself lately." There was something in his tone that made me look up sharply, but his expression was unreadable. After dinner, we walked through downtown Cleveland, the spring air cool and fresh after the afternoon rain. The streets were relatively quiet for a weeknight, just a few couples and groups of friends moving between restaurants and bars. We found ourselves at the edge of Lake Erie, standing on a pier that stretched out into the dark water, the city lights reflecting on the gentle waves. "I've missed this," Samuel said suddenly, his voice barely audible over the sound of water lapping against the pier. "Not just Cleveland, but this, talking to someone who knew me before I became whoever I'm supposed to be now." I turned to look at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. In the dim light from the street lamps, his face looked younger, more like the boy I'd known. "What do you mean?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the water. Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life? Like you've been following a script that was written for you instead of choosing your own words? The question hit me like a physical blow. It was so close to my own experience, so perfectly articulated, that for a moment I couldn't speak. Every day, I whispered finally. He turned to me then, his brown eyes searching my face in the darkness. I broke up with someone a few months ago. Sandra Lee. We'd been together for almost 2 years and everyone expected us to get engaged. She was perfect on paper. Everything I was supposed to want. Kind, beautiful, successful. My parents loved her, my friends loved her, and I thought I loved her too. What happened? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. I realized I was trying to love her the way I thought I should, not the way I actually felt, and that wasn't fair to either of us. He paused, running his hand through his hair, in a gesture I remembered from our teenage years. The thing is, I kept comparing her to someone else, someone I'd never been able to forget, no matter how hard I tried. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. The night air suddenly felt charged with possibility and danger, as if we were standing on the edge of a cliff with no way to know what lay below. Who? I managed to ask. Samuel looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression, a decision being made in real time. You, he said simply. It was always you. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. 20 years of carefully guarded secrets, of hidden feelings and unspoken truths, crystallized into this single moment of revelation. I stared at him, unable to process what I'd just heard, unable to believe that the words I dreamed of hearing for so long had actually been spoken. I know it's crazy, he continued, his words coming faster now, as if a dam had burst inside him. I know we were just kids, and I know you probably never thought of me that way, but I've been carrying this around for so long. Every relationship I've had, every person I've tried to love, they all fell short because they weren't you. They weren't the boy who sat with me in the cafeteria, who understood me in ways no one else ever has. I wanted to speak, to tell him that he was wrong, that I had thought of him that way, that I'd been in love with him since we were 15 years old. But the words wouldn't come. The shock of hearing my own feelings reflected back to me was too overwhelming, too surreal to process. Samuel must have interpreted my silence as rejection because his face fell and he took a step back. I'm sorry, he said quickly. I shouldn't have said anything. I've ruined everything, haven't I? Our friendship, this dinner, everything. No, I said, finally finding my voice. No, you haven't ruined anything. I took a deep breath, summoning courage I didn't know I possessed. Samuel, I need to tell you something, something I should have told you years ago. The next hour passed in a blur of confessions and revelations that rewrote the history of our entire relationship. We sat on a bench overlooking the lake, and I told him everything. About the dreams that had haunted my teenage years, about the jealousy I'd felt when he dated Andrea White, about the years of hiding and denial and self-hatred that had followed. I told him about coming out to my mother, about therapy and self-acceptance, about the loneliness of loving someone I thought I could never have. Samuel listened without interruption, his face cycling through expressions of surprise, understanding, and something that looked like grief. When I finished, we sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 20 years of unspoken truth settling between us like a bridge finally built across an impossible chasm. All this time, he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. All these years, we were both hiding the same thing. It seems impossible, I agreed, like something out of a novel. A badly plotted novel, he said with a shaky laugh. The kind where the reader wants to shake the characters and tell them to just talk to each other. We talked until nearly 3 in the morning, 20 years of missed connections and parallel experiences spilling out into the cool night air. Samuel told me about his own journey of self-discovery, how he'd dated women throughout college and his 20s, while always feeling like something was missing. How he'd convinced himself that his feelings for me were just nostalgia for a simpler time, until his relationship with Sandra forced him to confront the truth he'd been avoiding. I think I knew, even in high school, and he said, above it, I was so scared. My family, the town we grew up in, everything told me that what I was feeling was wrong. So I buried it, the same way you did. We were just kids, I said. We did what we thought we had to do to survive. But we're not kids anymore, he said, turning to look at me. We're adults who get to choose our own lives, write our own stories. The implication hung in the air between us, heavy with possibility and fear. I wanted to reach for his hand, to close the physical distance that mirrored the emotional distance we'd been maintaining for so long. But 20 years of caution aren't easily overcome, even in the face of mutual confession. What happens now? I asked. Samuel was quiet for a moment, considering. I don't know, he said honestly. This is all so new, so unexpected. I came here thinking I was going to have dinner with an old friend, maybe get some closure on feelings I thought were one-sided. I never imagined that the feelings were mutual, I finished. Exactly. He looked out at the water, then back at me. I live in Columbus. You live here. We're both in our 30s, set in our ways, established in our careers. This isn't exactly the ideal time to be figuring out something this fundamental about ourselves. I felt a familiar stab of disappointment, the same feeling I'd carried through most of my adult life when reality intruded on possibility. You're right, I said, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. It's complicated. But, Samuel continued, and the words stopped my heart, complicated doesn't mean impossible. It just means we have to be intentional about this, careful. We have 20 years of friendship to consider, and I don't want to lose that if this doesn't work out. And if it does work out, he smiled then, the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen from him all evening. If it works out, then we get to find out what we might have had all along. We made plans to see each other again the following weekend, Samuel driving up from Columbus for a more relaxed visit without the pressure of a single evening to contain 20 years of revelation. The week that followed was the longest of my life, filled with second-guessing and anticipation in equal measure. I found myself distracted in class, my students commenting on my unusual preoccupation, and I spent hours staring at my phone, composing and deleting text messages that never seemed to capture what I wanted to say. When Samuel arrived that Saturday afternoon, some of the awkwardness from our first meeting had dissipated, replaced by a nervous excitement that felt more manageable. We spent the day doing mundane things that took on extraordinary significance in the context of our new understanding. We went to a farmer's market, cooked dinner together in my small kitchen, watched a movie on my couch with careful space between us, both hyper-aware of every accidental touch and shared glance. It was during the movie, some romantic comedy that neither of us was really watching, that Samuel reached for my hand. The touch was tentative, questioning, and I responded by intertwining our fingers, marveling at how perfectly they fit together. We sat like that for the remainder of the film, not speaking, just existing in the strange new reality of acknowledged desire. This feels surreal, Samuel said as the credits rolled. Like I'm going to wake up and discover it was all a dream. If it is a dream, I don't want to wake up, I replied, surprised by my own boldness. He turned to face me on the couch, our hands still linked. Can I kiss you? He asked, and the question was so gentle, so respectful of the magnitude of the moment, that I could only nod. Our first kiss was everything I had imagined and nothing like I had expected. It was soft and hesitant, a question being asked and answered simultaneously. It tasted like the wine we'd shared with dinner and felt like coming home after a very long journey. When we broke apart, Samuel rested his forehead against mine, and I could see tears in his eyes that matched my own. I can't believe we waited 20 years for that, he whispered. Maybe we needed to wait, I said. Maybe we had to become who we are now before we could have this. The next few months unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of discovery and rediscovery. Samuel and I took turns driving between Cleveland and Columbus, spending weekends exploring this new dimension of our relationship while carefully maintaining the friendship that had always been its foundation. We talked constantly, making up for years of unspoken truths and hidden feelings, learning each other all over again as adults with the freedom to love openly. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of panic when the reality of our situation felt overwhelming. Times when old fears and insecurities threatened to pull us back into familiar patterns of hiding and denial. Samuel struggled with coming out to his family and coworkers, while I grappled with the vulnerability of loving someone so completely after years of emotional self-protection. But for every moment of doubt, there were 10 moments of joy that I had never imagined possible. The simple pleasure of holding hands in public, of introducing Samuel as my boyfriend, of building a shared life that honored both our individual growth and our collective history. We were writing a new chapter in a story that had been 20 years in the making, and every page felt like a gift. The letter that brought me back to this rainy Tuesday morning arrived 6 months into our official relationship. Samuel had been offered a promotion that would require him to relocate to Chicago, an opportunity too good to pass up, but one that would put significant distance between us, just as we were building something real. The cream-colored paper contained his careful explanation of the situation, his excitement about the career advancement tempered by concern about what it would mean for us. I've read the letter dozens of times over the past 3 days, memorizing every word, every carefully chosen phrase. Samuel writes that he wants me to come with him, that he's found a teaching position at a private school in Chicago that would be perfect for me, that he can't imagine taking this next step in his career without me by his side. But he also writes that he understands if I'm not ready for such a big change, if the risk feels too great after we've only just found each other. The rain continues its steady rhythm against the window, and I think about the boy who shared his lunch with me in a middle school cafeteria 23 years ago. That simple act of kindness, had been the beginning of everything. The first thread in a tapestry that we've been weaving ever since, even when we didn't realize what we were creating. Samuel had seen something in me that day that I couldn't see in myself, had offered friendship and acceptance without conditions or expectations. Now he's offering me something even more precious, the chance to build a life together, to stop hiding from the truth of who we are and what we mean to each other. The scared 12-year-old inside me wants to decline, to choose the safety of the known over the uncertainty of the possible. But the man I've become, the teacher who tells his students daily about the importance of courage and authenticity, knows there's really only one answer. I walk to my desk and pull out a sheet of paper, the same cream-colored stationery that Samuel used for his letter. The words come easily once I start writing, flowing from a place of certainty I didn't know I possessed. I tell him yes, of course yes, that I've been waiting my entire adult life for someone to invite me into their future, and I can't imagine saying no to him. I tell him about the scared boy I used to be and the man I'm becoming, about love as an act of courage and faith as a choice we make daily. As I seal the envelope, I realize that this letter represents more than just a response to Samuel's job offer. It's an acceptance of everything we've been moving toward since that first shared sandwich, an acknowledgement that some stories take decades to unfold, and that the best endings are really just new beginnings in disguise. The rain is beginning to ease, and afternoon sunlight filters through the clouds, casting everything in my small apartment in a golden glow. I think about packing boxes and saying goodbye to this place that has been my refuge, about starting over in a new city with the man who has been the constant thread running through my entire life. The fear is still there, will probably always be there to some degree, but it's overwhelmed now by excitement and possibility and the deep, abiding joy of finally being able to love without hiding. I put on my coat and walked to the mailbox at the end of my street, Samuel's letter clutched in my hand like a talisman. The neighborhood is quiet in the aftermath of the storm, everything washed clean and gleaming with possibility. As I drop the letter into the slot, I think about the 12-year-old boy who was too afraid to ask for what he needed, who accepted kindness like a gift he didn't deserve. That boy couldn't have imagined this moment, couldn't have conceived of a future where love was possible, where authenticity was rewarded rather than punished, where the person who had shown him kindness in a school cafeteria would grow up to offer him a lifetime of the same generous spirit. The journey from that scared child to this hopeful adult has been long and sometimes painful, marked by years of self-denial and fear, but every step has led to this moment of choice and possibility. I walk back to my apartment, already mentally cataloging what I'll need to pack, what I'll need to leave behind, how to explain to my students and colleagues that I'm moving on to the next chapter of my life. The practical details will sort themselves out, as they always do. What matters is the decision itself, the choice to step into uncertainty with faith that love is worth the risk. My phone buzzes with a text from Samuel, probably asking if I've had a chance to think about his letter. I smile and type back a simple message. Check your mailbox tomorrow. I love you too. It's the first time I've written those words to him. The first time I've allowed myself to be that vulnerable in writing, and hitting send feels like another small act of courage in a day full of them. The apartment feels different now, less like a permanent refuge and more like a way station, a place I've been staying while waiting for the next part of my story to begin. I look around at the books lining my shelves, the papers I need to grade, the half-finished novel sitting on my desk, and I realize that all of these things will come with me to Chicago. The external details of my life are changing, but the essential parts of who I am remain constant. I think about my mother, who will be pained to see me move farther away, but who has always supported my choices, especially the difficult ones. I think about my students, who will understand better than most adults the importance of following your heart even when it's scary. I think about the new school in Chicago, the opportunity to start fresh while carrying the best parts of my past with me. Most of all, I think about Samuel, probably sitting in his apartment in Columbus right now, wondering what my response will be, hoping but not assuming, respecting my autonomy even as he opens his heart completely. The man he's become is everything the boy I fell in love with promised to be: kind, thoughtful, brave enough to take risks for love, generous enough to share not just his lunch, but his entire life. Tomorrow, I'll call the school in Chicago and accept their offer. I'll start making lists and researching moving companies and figuring out the logistics of relocating my entire life. I'll begin the process of saying goodbye to this chapter so I can embrace the next one fully. But tonight, I'm going to sit with the magnitude of this decision, the weight and wonder of choosing love after so many years of choosing safety. The rain has stopped completely now, and the evening air smells fresh and clean, full of possibility. I make myself a cup of tea and sit by the window, watching the last of the storm clouds dissipate in the distance. Somewhere in Columbus, Samuel is probably doing something similar, maybe looking out his own window and thinking about the future we're about to build together. In a few weeks, we'll be in Chicago, unpacking boxes in an apartment we've chosen together, figuring out how to merge two lives that have been separate for so long. We'll learn each other's morning routines and evening habits, discover new things about each other while rediscovering the familiar comfort of our oldest friendship. There will be challenges, certainly moments when the reality of living together doesn't match the fantasy we've been building, but there will also be countless small joys that we've been dreaming of for decades. I imagine cooking breakfast together on Saturday mornings, the easy intimacy of shared domestic life that I've watched other couples take for granted. I imagine introducing Samuel to my new colleagues, the simple pleasure of being able to speak openly about the person I love. I imagine quiet evenings reading together, the comfortable silence of two people who have known each other long enough that words aren't always necessary. Most of all, I imagine the gradual relaxation of muscles I didn't know I was holding tense, the slow unclenching of a fist that has been closed around my heart for most of my adult life. The freedom to love openly without shame or fear is still so new that it feels almost too good to be true. But Samuel's letter, with its careful balance of hope and respect, reminds me that this is real, that we're both choosing this with full awareness of what it means. The boy who shared his lunch with me 23 years ago is now the man who wants to share his life with me, and I am no longer the scared child who accepted kindness like charity. We are two adults who have found our way back to each other across decades of confusion and growth, who have learned to love ourselves enough to risk loving each other completely. As the evening deepens and the first stars appear in the clearing sky, I allow myself to feel the full weight of gratitude for this moment, this choice, this unexpected gift of a love story that refused to end even when both protagonists tried to write different endings. Some stories, I realize, are bigger than the people living them, persistent enough to wait for their characters to grow into the roles they were always meant to play. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and new joys, the beginning of a chapter we've been writing separately for 20 years but will now write together. Tonight, though, I'm content to sit with the knowledge that love, real love, is worth every year of waiting, every moment of fear, every risk taken in its name. The rain has stopped, the storm has passed, and somewhere in the distance, a new day is already beginning to dawn.